Welcome back to A Simple Word, in which we talk about the gospel for the upcoming Sunday in order to prepare you to enter fully into the liturgy. And this Sunday we'll be celebrating Pentecost, and the church actually gives us two gospel options and a beautiful introduction with other scriptures. First, we have the account of Pentecost, and we hear of the Holy Spirit that comes down upon the apostles. And it's absolutely beautiful what happens. It said that they were in this place together, and all of a sudden there came from the sky a noise. There was a strong wind. There were tongues of fire that lit upon each of the apostles. And when this happened, they were filled with the Holy Spirit, and it says that they began to speak in different tongues as the Spirit was enabling them to proclaim the word. It's a beautiful account of what happened in the early church, how the Spirit was so generous, so vibrant. But there's a temptation to get caught up in the spectacular when we think of the Spirit. There's the wind, there's the fire, there's all of these miracles, manifestations of God. And this is something we also look for. Often we're praying to God because we want a miracle. We want something to happen that's going to change our lives or bring peace to our world. And yet we need to make sure that we don't miss the point, because the last thing that's said here is not about all of these miracles, but rather we hear them speaking in our own tongues of the mighty acts of God. In other words, what was most important was that now the apostles could announce the good news in a way that everyone could hear. Now it was possible for everyone to know of God, of Jesus Christ. The Spirit brings communion to the world. In fact, we speak about this day as the day in which the church was born. The church not just as some institution, but as all of these people who were gathered together in communion. In the responsorial psalm, we're going to hear, Lord, send out your Spirit and renew the face of the earth. It's a prayer that in the coming of the Spirit, we would be one on this earth. St. Paul says in his letter to the Corinthians, in one Spirit, we were all baptized into one body. So it doesn't matter whether we're Jews or Greeks or slaves or free, we're all given to drink of the one Spirit. This is a precious gift of Pentecost, that we are given communion through the coming of the Spirit. Now, as I said, there are two possible gospel options. I don't know which one your parish will pick, but the first one, which is probably it, is the account in which Jesus, as he had risen from the dead, came to where the disciples were. It's sort of like the scene from Pentecost that would take place. They're locked in a room not knowing what's going to happen. And Jesus comes in and he stands there and he says, peace be with you. And he shows them his hands and his side. This is very important because the resurrection of Christ is much more than just something in which a person is raised from the dead, sort of like Lazarus, in which they get to live again for a period of time. But in his resurrection, he still has his wounds. And in his resurrection, he's sharing with his disciples the Spirit that enables them to also share in his Paschal mystery. This is what we're all being invited to. So Jesus says to them, peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you. And he breathes on them and says, receive the Holy Spirit. And then what does he say? Whose sins you forgive are forgiven them, and whose sins you retain are retained. Now, some people think about this simply in terms of the sacrament of penance, which it certainly represents. But in addition to this, Jesus is calling the church to forgive sins, saying, this is possible. It's a beautiful promise of communion, because the one thing that stands between all of us, that can cause discommunion is when we have a judgment, when we think of injustice, when we think that this cannot be, we cannot be of one mind. And yet Jesus says, whose sins you forgive are forgiven them, whose sins you retain are retained. In other words, you do have the ability to forgive if you want. This is something that comes only with the Holy Spirit. The other gospel option is also from John, in which Jesus is speaking at the Last Supper to his disciples. And he's saying to them, when the advocate comes, and he's speaking about the Holy Spirit, he says it's the Spirit of truth. He said, he will testify to me, and you also testify. It's a very interesting word that they're giving us. What does it mean? That there's a connection between our experience of Jesus Christ that we testify to and the fact that the Holy Spirit also has testified to Christ in our lives. We don't have faith on our own. We're not a church on our own. Sometimes people will try to separate this and say, well, religion that's your business, or faith, that's about you. It's not about everyone. By nature, our faith has to be shared. By nature, what we've been given by the Holy Spirit is what we testify to. So all of the miracles that have taken place through Jesus Christ, through the Holy Spirit, have one purpose in mind, that they bring about communion. As you listen to the gospel this coming Sunday, to all of the scriptures, I invite you to hear this word Holy Spirit and consider, what is the Spirit bringing to me? What is it that I desire? We often will say, come Holy Spirit, and we'll hear this many times in this liturgy. But what does this prayer inspire for you? Think of the words of this prayer to the Holy Spirit. Come Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. The coming of the Spirit is so that everyone could have this same love of Christ and that the earth would be renewed. It's an opportunity for communion. So as you celebrate this coming Sunday, I pray that what you experience through the coming of the Holy Spirit in the sacrament of the Eucharist is a communion that extends beyond whatever church you're praying in, wherever you're celebrating, and that we can together desire a communion in which we're able to embrace all the peoples. We don't even have to go too far. It's good just to be embracing the people around us, the people we disagree with. But with the Spirit, it's also possible to embrace and be in communion with all peoples of the earth. So if you liked this presentation, please click like, and we hope to see you again next week. God bless.